All right, so let's just jump right into this, and we're going to start off today by building this very colorful little beach sandal or flip-flop, and it's going to be a fairly simple model, and it will be a Catmull-Clark type of subdivision surface, and we'll just use a handful of tools on this. So listen up, pay close attention, and do exactly as I say, and no one will get hurt. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is open MODO and have a fresh empty scene available to us, and we'll be in the MODO tab right up here, so as opposed to the modeling tab. With the MODO tab you have most of the tools available to you in the left hand side here, so we'll make use of these toolboxes here. So the first thing we want to do is add an image that we can use as a reference for our model, and we're going to go ahead and click on this little guy right here. That's the image browser or the clip browser. And we're going to go to add clip load image and navigate over to where the images are for this particular lesson, and just grab either the PSC or the PNG of the flip-flop and put that right in there. Now there's a couple of ways we can add a backdrop image. We could have just dragged and dropped that image from the any browser window on our system into the MODO's viewport, and that would have automatically created a little backdrop item. But if you loaded it this way, you can just create a backdrop item here, and you can see it adds this plane in your viewport. Now I'm going to go ahead and add that image onto that plane, and going down here to the properties panel and dragging that up with the backdrop item highlighted. You can see all the properties for the backdrop, and under here where it says image, click on that, and that'll just bring up that little browser, and that will give us our image. Now you'll notice that it is kind of upright, and we want this image down. Now we're just using one image for this project, and I think that's all we're going to need. So this is a top-down view, and it gives us the most information about this particular product. So instead of a front view, projection type, I'm going to go over here and set this to a top view. All right, there we go. And I can go ahead and close this browser panel. We want to work at scale as much as possible, and whenever you add a backdrop item to your scene and put an image on it, 9 times out of 10 it is the wrong scale, and so we need to make sure that this is about 11 inches in size or 28 centimeters. So let's see where we're at right now. If I grab my measuring tool and just click and drag it there, we can see I'm about 5.3 meters, and that's a little bit big. So what we need to do is shrink this down. Now, how do we do that? Well, we could go over here to the backdrop item tools here, the properties, and select scale, but we're just kind of guessing at how big that 11 inches is, or 28 millimeters is, compared to the 5 meters here. Or we could go down here and change the pixel size here. And if I change that to, say 2 millimeters, millimeters, like that shrinks it down. But again, that's just guessing, and we're having to measure that each time. So what I'd like to do is simply go to backdrop size keep aspect. So I'm going to go here, and the height, which in this case is this measurement here, is going to be 28 centimeters, and I'm going to hit tab to lock that in, click OK, and you can see it sized it perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my measure tool, and let's just grab that guy right there and put this guy down here and see where we're at. Yeah, roughly 28 centimeters, and so we're good. All right. All right, let's get started modeling our sandal here. And the first thing we want to do is jump over to an empty mesh layer, which is right up here. If you don't have an empty mesh layer, you can create one by just clicking that little down arrow there and going up to mesh, and that will create an empty layer for you. Next thing we want to do is make sure snapping is off, because a lot of times the measurement tool will leave the snapping feature active even when you turn off the measuring tool. Then let's go ahead and make sure we are in polygon mode, and instead of perspective view, let's go to the top-down view. Now I'm going to go over and just click on the primitives tool here on the cube primitive and click on that, and I'm going to bring up its tool properties by clicking on that little item right there, or hitting the K key will do the same thing. Now I'm just going to simply drag my mouse from click and drag from the upper left hand corner to the lower right hand corner and get it somewhere like that. Now you'll notice but I can't see through the model, actually the polygon, to the image below, but we'll take care of that in a minute. But we're just getting it in the ballpark here. And as far as position, I'm just going to leave everything where that's at, but the segments, I'm going to set that to 3 on the X and 6 on the Z axis. And so that's all I need for that. And like I said, it's very difficult to see through this in order to align this to our background image. So we need to do something here about our backdrop image. So what we need to do is actually make sure that this button, this overlay drawing, is clicked active, and it is for us. If it isn't, just click that active. But this only works in perspective view. If you're working in perspective view, let's just go over real quick. You can see through the model to the image beneath it, but if I'm in an orthographic view, I can't see through it. So what we need to do is go over to this gear, this little cog up the upper right hand corner, click on that, bring up the viewport properties, and under the first drawing and control here, you can see about near the lower part of the screen, you'll see something called background imagery, and we'll just activate overlay. All right, so there we go, and that's good. I'm just going to close that. Now the other thing is that the background image now is so overpowering, we really can't see our wireframe on our model through that. So, and it's important that we do see that. So what we need to do is go to the backdrop item, and just near the bottom here, you'll see contrast, brightness, transparency. We want to select transparency, and I'm just going to click on these little double arrows here on the right hand side of the input field, and click and drag that up, and you will see that it makes the background image somewhat transparent, so that I get a nice balance between the polygon model here and the background imagery, so I can see both at the same time. Wireframe's now visible to me. And if I jump over to my perspective view, I have pretty much the same sort of viewing capabilities. All right. So let's go ahead and move the vertices around the edge of this box to match up with the edge of our image here. So I'm going to go back into my top view. All right. And there's a lot of ways we can do this. We can actually just select vertices and just move them around if we want to do that. But I think the easiest way to do that is with a tool and the deform toolbox called Element Move, and that's also the T key will bring that up. Now we can see here with the tool properties, we can have some control over how much of an influence it adjusts. So if I right click anywhere in the viewport and drag my mouse, you can see I get a little gizmo that increases or decreases with size depending upon how I move my mouse. And this is the actual sphere of influence of the moving of these points, of the translation of these points. So if I click on a point here and drag it, you'll notice that the points around it are moving as well, ever so slightly. So if I increase that a lot, I can move a lot of points around. All right. So, but what I want to do is I want to keep this down to 0, and that's this range here. That's this feature right there. So we want to keep the range at 0 right now. And I'm just going to click and drag some of these vertices and edges to match up with the edge of my model here. Another thing you'll notice here, if I want to move this vertice, this little arrow tends to be in my way. So I can either decrease the size of that gizmo with the plus or minus key, but if it doesn't go far enough, I have to click over here just to move the arrows out of the way. Then I can click on my vertice and move it where I want. Okay, it doesn't take very long. Just get those where I want them. Let's see, right about there. And if you need to zoom in, just zoom in. And we're not getting this perfectly aligned right now. We're just kind of roughing it in, okay? Now I'm going to just convert this to a subdivision surface, Captain Clark to be specific. I'm holding Shift Tab key, and that converts it into a smooth Captain Clark surface. However, if we look real closely, we can see we've got some sharp edges here. And we want to just kind of make sure this is soft. Now, if I were to convert it to a standard sub-D, hit the tab and hit the tab again, now we get some smooth surfaces, and that's not bad either. But I like to work with Captain Clark, so I'm going to hit the tab to convert it back into polygons, hit Shift Tab back into Captain Clark's. As you can see down here, it reads Captain Clark's. However, I'm going to change a setting in the Captain Clark smoothing features just so that I can get rid of these sharp corners. So I'm going to select the mesh. I'm going to go down here to where it says Surfaces, and where it says Boundary Rules, under Captain Clark, Boundary Rules, Crease All, I'm going to set to Smooth All. Okay. And that will allow those sharp corners to be smoothed out. Now we could change that later if we need to add some like sharper edges or crisper corners. We can do that. So, all right. And before we go any farther with this project, let's go up to File and Save As. All right, moving on. So one thing I'd like to do before I continue modeling the sole here is to change the UI a little bit, because I noticed that the wireframe of the model is kind of getting lost amidst all the other background noise, the surface grid, as well as the image file that we're using as a backdrop item. So there's a couple of things we can do here. We can actually go to the backdrop item and just adjust the transparency so it's even more transparent, so we can see the wireframe of the model a little bit better. Or we can opt to go to the little cog up the upper right hand corner to adjust the viewport settings here. And if you look under visibility, you will see something called general visibility and show work plane active. I can set that to never, and I can set that to never as well, and that turns that off. Okay. We can also do that by holding down the, I believe it is the Control 1 key, and you'll get a pop-up menu, and you can just toggle that toggle the wireframe, or toggle the grid right there. All right, and let me turn that wireframe back on. These are just toggle switches that pop up in a pie menu. All right, so that is Control 1. And the other thing we can do is we can actually enhance the wireframe itself on the model. And again, going to the little cog up there, the viewport properties, active meshes, where it says colored wireframe, we can set that to opacity of, say 30% maybe. And you can see that darkens the wireframe. So that helps us kind of see that against the background item as well. Okay, so all right. So the next thing I think I need to do is accommodate the holes that are punched into the sole to allow for the upper strap to be attached. Okay, so however, we do want to make sure that we keep everything in quads. The ideal structure for any subdivision surface model is to stay in quad mode. Now, if I were to just punch holes in these in the surface here, you'll notice that the surrounding geometry will no longer be quads. They'll be multi-sided polygons, and they don't really render well as far as the subdivision surfaces go. So I want to make sure that we accommodate the all quad rule of thumb here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this edge, and I'm going to go to my edge tools here, and I'm going to just bevel them, or hit the B key for bevel, and that's going to split that edge. Oops, excuse me. Let me use the blue handle there. So I have to, in order to see the blue handle, I have to kind of look at it at angle. Okay. All right. There's that one. Now, another thing I want to do is make sure that I have another edge here, because I don't want this to be this polygon to go all the way over to the edge. I want to have another polygon in there. So let's do that with the Add Loop tool. I'm I'm going to zoom in here. I'll just select that edge there, and it adds a loop, and that's pretty close. Let's do it again. I'll drop the tool. I'll add loop. Let me bring up the properties here. You'll notice this is set to split in the middle. It doesn't really have to be. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. All right. And I'll move that there. Now you can see I have a polygon there and a polygon there that I can bevel to accommodate a sort of a hole in the surface of the in the model. Okay, same thing over here. I'm just going to go ahead and do an edge loop, add loop, right about there. And you can see what happens is it pushes this edge a little farther away to accommodate the stresses on the subdivision surface. All right. Now we can also just check this out in poly mode here, and I'm going to add one more loop. I want to be careful not to get too many edges in here. Now you'll notice that the edges that I added here actually create very close close vertices right in here as well. So what I want to do is I want to space these out more, because if I don't do that, then we won't get a very smooth rounded edge here. So let's just, and you can see already how these are a lot tighter. And we can do that with a very cool little tool in the vertex toolbox here called slide. And you have to be in vertice mode to make this work. So I'm going to click on slide, and we're just going to click on a vertice, and you'll see these little arrows come up. And I'm just going to slide those over just to space the vertices out a little bit more. And here. And let's get this guy. Again, I have to click away to move the arrows so I can get these moved. And it looks like I probably have one here as well. Yeah, so I want to just space these out a little bit. Oops, let's go ahead and do the slide again. There we go. And I think there's another one over here somewhere. There it is. Another cool little feature that we can use to smooth out our rounded edges like this is a tool over here under Deform toolbox at the bottom called Linear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this edge. I'm going to shift click on this edge, Control G to select all those edges in between. I'm going to go to the Linear tool. I'm going to bring up the tool properties, make sure this is set to curve, and uniform is checked, and I'm just going to click in the viewport and drag, and you can see that really smooths that out quite a bit. So what it's trying to do is trying to space all the vertices along these edges equally. So that helps to smooth out any inconsistencies there. And the same, I'll try the same with this one, that one, Shift G, go to Linear, click in the viewport and drag, and as you can see how the vertices are spacing out in there. So this really works well as a smoothing tool. Now we need to add some thickness to our model here. So I'm going to select the polygons here. Now how thick do we want to make this? Well, in looking at the wide variety of sandals and flip-flops out there, really the thicknesses is all over the map. We can make this everything from a platform to a flat form and everything in between. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball this, and I'm going to use the bevel tool to thicken this, and make sure group polygons is selected in the tool properties. And I'm going to go ahead and just drag this up a little bit, because the bottom is sitting on the ground. Now, in order to make sure that there's a bottom on this, we have to click the thicken option here, and that gives us a nice thickness. Now you'll notice that the edges are somewhat round. I'm going to make that a little bit thicker, and so we can just add a couple of segments in this. I'm going to add 3 segments, And that's going to tighten up that edge a little bit more. I'll definitely want it tighter than that, but for now, this will work for me. So before we start building this strap area here, I want to do one more thing on these polygons that are going to be a part of the hole that's going to accommodate that strap. I want to just kind of move some things over. So I'm going to take the element move tool. Oops, that's element push. Sorry about that. Element move. And just move this over a little bit just to line it up a little bit better. All right. And this one as well. Move that down there. Move this down here just to get the wireframe looking a little bit better. All right, so another thing that I want to do is I'm going to select each of these polygons and I'm going to run this radial tool. And I might have to do that more than once, but what that's going to do is it's going to space out these vertices that make up this quad evenly so that when I do a bevel on that, that's going to be a perfect circle. So and it might not look like a perfect circle right now, but it will be. I'm just going to shrink it down. And let's see, the same with this one. Radial, click in the viewport, and that makes that a perfect square. And radial on this one as well. There we go. Now, if I were to tab this back to a just a poly surface, you could see that these are perfect squares. So I'm going to resize this one just to make them a little bit more even between this and this. And yeah, so that should work. So make that, move that right about there. Okay. All right, that should work. We can adjust the sizes later, but for now, I think that's where we want to be with this. Okay. Let's go ahead and build the strap part of this model. And before we do that, however, I want to go ahead and rename this existing mesh here. Call it sole. And because I'm going to need a new layer which to build this strap. All right, so I'm going to go to here, click on that, add a new mesh item layer. And now we want to build this strap piece using the curve tool. All right, so I'm going to jump over here to, now we could use it, click on this if we want, but we can also find the curves in the curve toolbox right here. And one thing I want to do though, real quick, is go to the backdrop items, and I'm going to make that much more transparent because my strap here is black and the curve that it's going to create is also black. So it might be kind of hard to see it against that backdrop image. So I'm going to make this 80%. Okay. Now I'm going to grab a curve right there, the curve tool. I'm going to start here at the bottom. I'm going to click there, 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 right here, and right there. I don't have to have too many control vertices on here, but right about there, and just kind of center where it needs to be in the top view. Now let's jump over to our right view. All right, or actually, this do perspective view here. Okay. So I can see where that, how this needs to go. And we need to raise these vertices up in the air a little more. All right, so let's go ahead and, with this still active, I'm going to bring that up, that one, and just bring these vertices up a bit. Because we know, although we don't have a profile view of this, we know that this strap lifts up and over and down. So let's look at this in, let's look at it in right view. All right. And I think that's good enough for right now. And again, we are only going to build half of the strap, and then we'll mirror the other half once we get this part built. So there's a lot of ways we can build this strap, but the way that I want to show you how to build this is by using a tool in the duplicate toolbox called Curve Extrude, and it's going to extrude a cross section along this curve. So first thing I want to do is rename this curve layer here. I'll call this curve layer. How about that? Now I want to show you a couple of features of working with curves before we go any farther with this. If you've dropped the curve and you're in, say, item mode and you select the curve, you don't see any editing ability. So in order to go back and edit a curve that you've already created, you have to be in polygon mode. Then you have to mouse over the curve and select it, and you'll see that the nodes now come back to life. Okay, so I can make adjustments and I can actually add nodes. And let's go to the properties here. And immediately we are put in edit mode. But if I wanted to add more nodes to this, I can add more nodes. So the next CV on this curve will be added right after the one that is already selected. But yeah, so you can actually add and edit this curve and after you've dropped the tool. So now let's look at this curve for a second. Curves have a little ring at one end or another, and that's the head of the curve. That's where you started the first vertice to build that curve. So that's the start of it, and that's the end of it. Now in our case, I think what we did, we built it so that the head was down here. So we want to actually flip it so that the head is right up at the top there, and I will just hit the F key. And so hitting the F key just kind of toggles that head from one end to the other. So it's kind of flipping the position of the head of the curve. So in our case, we want the head of the curve to be at the more towards the toe of the sole. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways we can actually build this strap, and the way I want to show you is using a tool in the duplicate toolbox here called Curve Extrude. So we're actually going to just build a cross section here, simple little polyline, and we're going to extrude that along this curve. So in doing so, I need to create a new layer. All right, N for new. And the other thing I want to do is I'm going to turn off the solo feature so I can see my background layer as well, but I don't want to see the sole, so I want to turn that off. So I just want to make sure that curve is visible and that I'm on my empty mesh layer. And I'm going to jump over to the curve palette, grab another, this is a simple curve right there. And I don't even actually have to do this over the strap area. I can do this off to the side here. And so I'm just going to go about like that. So I'm guessing that that's about the size of the curve, right about there. And we can always change the width later. It's no big deal. All right, so I have an item that I want to extrude, and I'm going to use that curve layer to extrude it. So I'm going to hit the escape key, and I'm going to be in item mode to do this. So I've got that item layer selected. Let's just go over to the duplicate toolbox, grab the curve extrude, and I'm just going to click over the top of this curve here, and you can see it just extruded that right along there. Now make sure path align is on. Now by default this automatic is checked, and it creates a lot of segments, and when we're dealing with Cat McClark's or subdivision surfaces, you don't need that many segments to define this the curvature of this strap. So I'll uncheck that, and I keep my steps right around 8 for something like this. Okay, now the next thing you're going to notice is that this strap actually rotates around actually clockwise, I believe. And I don't want to drop the tool. I want to make sure I keep the tool on, so I'm not going to select anything else right now. But you can actually adjust it if you want to go in and make some minor adjustments to that. Of course, we can do this later as well. But we want to make sure that the top of the strap becomes the bottom. So we've got, I believe, a clockwise twist to this. So with that, I'm going to use the twist feature here. And I'm going to just click and drag on those little arrows. And if you want, you can just put in a number 2 here as well. So I'm going to make that negative, let's see, 150. Let's see where that gets us. And there it is. We can see that the strap is twisting at the tail end there. And that's not too bad. Now what I can also do is click on one of these nodes and use the bank angle tool right there. So that'll also bank my object here, or twist my object, but it does it on a node by node basis. So I can just dial that back a little bit. The twist twists the whole strap, and the bank feature is for individual nodes, for banking those individual nodes. So I think I'm getting pretty happy with that. I'm going to dial this one back a little bit. Probably make that a 0. Yeah, -17. I think that's good. So now we have the strap with a curve and a twist at the same time. Okay. And I think we're pretty good right there. All right. Now I'm going to drop the tool. So once you drop the tool, you can't go back and adjust it with the twist nut. You have to do things more manually at that point. All right. So I'm going to hit escape and we are good. Okay, so moving on, I think we're going to go ahead and just turn off that curve layer and rename this other layer here. We'll call this strap. Okay, good. Now, looking at it, I might want to make a few little changes because I want this top part to be a little flatter than this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the rotate tool, but I'll select it in edge mode. So I'll use the E key, and I want to make sure that this guy right here, select through, is on, and that's going to allow me to jump from edge to edge and make these changes relatively quickly rather than drop the tool and have to reselect an edge each time. All right. And maybe jump a little bit more, grab this red arrow, and make sure that your selection or your action center is set to selection. That will help you. I think that's good. And the other thing I want to do is I want to move this this corner back a little bit. So let me zoom in here. I'm going to go to my top view actually to do this. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to use the element move tool right here. Make sure nothing is selected actually. Use the element move tool. And yeah, so let's just pull that back. And I think my strap there is a little bit on the wide side. There we go. I'm going to look at this in perspective too. You're always rotating around your object to look at it at every possible angle as you move through it. All right. I think I'm pretty good with that. Let's go back to the top view. I'm going to bring this out a little bit. Down right about there. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect, but close enough. Now what we want to do is to go ahead and mirror this guy. And I'm going to go to the duplicate. I'm going to go down here to mirror and just click somewhere in the viewport. And then I'm going to just click and drag this guy so it gets pretty close. I'm going to make sure that the head of this is as close as I can get it to the strap part. All right. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my poly mode here, double click on this guy, and I'll just use the rotate tool. But this time I'm going to set my action center up here. Oops. I want to turn off this mode, and then I'll click here for the action center and then just rotate that till the bottom gets to about where I need it to be. Okay, now you'll notice that we're going to have to shrink these in a little bit, so let's just go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go to the element move tool again, element move, and we'll just bring that in. Just grab those verts, bring that in, maybe bring that down a little bit. That in and that in. And I'm going to want to see what this is going to look like in relationship to the sole. And let's just turn this on here like that. There we go. Now I can see right now that my strap extends a little too far down. In fact, way too far down. Because when I extruded the sole, I extruded it up like this. So what I can do is just on this whole strap layer, just use the move tool, and we're just going to move that up. Okay, let me look at that in right view. Okay, I think that's pretty close. Now the next thing I'm going to do is bridge between these two edges. So I'm going to go into edge mode, make sure those two edges are selected, and yep. And let's just go over to the edge tools, and we're going to bridge, and I'm going to bring up the tool properties, and I've got 4 segments selected. Let's try 3 segments, and make sure this is set to smooth, and your tension's usually about 100%, but we'll see where that gets us. And yeah, that makes a nice curved edge, but let's bring the tension up a little bit more. It's a little pointed. little more pointed, and I think I'm happy with that. Let's look at what it looks like in a Captain Clark. Yeah. I think we're getting there. Now, next thing we want to do is go ahead and thicken this. Okay, so I'm going to use the bevel tool, polygon bevel, B, and make sure that the thicken option is engaged, and the segments, I'll just set that to 2. Actually, just set it to 1. And I'm just going to drag that up a little bit, and there we go. Maybe a little bit more right there. Okay, now let's see what it looks like as a Captain Clark. There, yeah. All right, and turn on the sole, and we can see that we are getting there. The last thing I want to do to the strap before we move on to other parts of the sandal is I want to sharpen or give this a little harder edge here. And the way I'm going to do that is just go to my edges, go to add loop, and I'm going to select somewhere on this top panel here. I'm just going to drag that in a little bit. And if you drag it too far, it merges with the previous edge. So we just want to give it maybe a 6 or 7% offset there from the other curve. All right, now holding down the shift key, I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Click there. And that's going to be maybe about a 97% drift on that. Okay, and I'm going to hit escape to drop the tool, and there we are. Now we have a nicer, cleaner edge on this top strap. Okay, so moving on here, I want to make a few more adjustments to the shoe here. And if we look at the strap, and particularly the end of the strap, we can see it penetrates the sole of the sandal. So what I want to do is I want to just make sure that does not penetrate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the Deform palette, go to Element Move. Now make sure nothing is selected, because if you have a polygon or something selected, the tool doesn't work because it does its own selection. So I'm going to right click anywhere in the viewport here just to size up my mouse, and just drag the, size up my brush size, and just move the mouse left or right, and we'll just drag that up a little bit, and you might want to move in closer, and just move that up till it just rests on the surface there. And same with this side, I'm going to pull that up. And I think that's pretty close. And sometimes you just got to get in there real close and see what it's doing. Great. I think that'll work. Yes. Now, staying with the strap, I need to make a little area here at the front of the strap that's going to receive this stem. So let me turn this off here. And if we look at the image here, we can see that there is a stem coming out from the sole up to the strap, and it actually comes out of the strap and penetrates the sole. So we're going to build that right now, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on the strap only. I'm going to turn off this background item too, and I'm going to go to the underside here. I'm going to select that polygon, and I'm going to go to our good friend Radial right here, click on that, and I'm going to click that just like that. Now I'm going to just convert this actually to a just a polygon object here, just to kind of get a better sense of the geometry that's going on. And we can see that the corners of this polygon here are extending way to this edge here, and I don't want them to extend that close. So I'm just going to shrink that down, hit the R key, and you can either grab the center because that is a single polygon, or you can just grab that little ring, the little green ring there, which will scale it in 2 directions. So I want to bring it here just so I have a little breathing space around this polygon. And now I'm going to drop the tool, and I'm going to bevel this. So I'm going to hit the B key for bevel, and I'm just going to grab that little red handle and drag that in. Okay, right about there. Now that should still retain its perfectly square dimensions there. So yeah, I think that's good. All right. Now if I convert this back to a Camel Clark, Shift Tab key, we can see we've got a nice polygon with which we can extrude or bevel out to become the stem. Okay, so now what I want to do is turn on the sole layer so that I can give a little attention to the area that's going to be the actual hole that we create for the stem. And we're not actually going to create a hole all the way through the sole because this is a visual model and not a actual physical one. So we want to just kind of imply that there is going to be a hole there. So what I want to do, I think, is go ahead and make sure that this area is radial. And it looks like it is. And again, I'm going to just convert this to a poly mode here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bevel this. Bring that in just like we did with the strap area there. All right, and let's go ahead and bevel it one more time. Hold down the Shift, click on the polygon, and now I'm going to just move that down like that. Okay, something around there. All right, now I'm going to copy this polygon. I'm going to go over to the strap layer. I'll just turn the sole off and I'm going to paste it right there. Now the reason I'm doing that is that I want to create the stem by actually bridging between here and there. Now I'm going to convert this back into polygons. Click there and I will click here. All right. Oops, that actually toggled that, so I want to make sure that that too is a polygon. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to the bridge tool, click on that. I'll bring up the tool properties right there. I'll just click in the viewport to activate the bridge tool, and you'll notice right away that that bridge got twisted on me. So you can use the twist feature in the tool properties to try to untwist that. And in this case I set 2, and that didn't really seem to work for me. And you can try different numbers, and they're up to probably the number of polygons that you have to see if that works. So if you're finding that the twist feature is not working for you to untwist the polygons, the best thing to do is to undo the bridge altogether and select those polygons that you want to bridge and flip them in opposite directions so that they are facing away from one another. Now I'll just click on the bridge tool and you see it works just fine. With the bridge tool still active, I will hit the K key to call up the tool properties, and I'll add more segments here. I think I'll try 3 and maybe one more, 4 segments in that bridge, and that looks pretty good to me. Now I'll unhide any hidden polygons that I had selected earlier. And yeah, then let's go ahead and convert that to a Camel Clark and convert the sole back to a Camel Clark. And now you can see we have a stem that extends down and penetrates the top of the sole. Whenever you're building any model in a subdivision surface modeler, you're always jumping back and forth between the various elements and refining them as you go along. So in this top piece here, the strap, I want to give a little more attention to the ends here, because as we can see in a real model here, the strap really comes to more of a point on the ends there. So I want to be sure that I address that. Now, how are we going to do that and also give it a little bit of roundness to it like we see in the actual model? Well, we can do that by using the smoothing tool here, just selecting those polygons. What that's going to do is that's going to bring these edges in a little bit more. Now I'll switch back to a standard poly model to see that now. And again, having a good poly model is going to give you a really good subdivision surface model. So let me go to this edge here, and I can see that's a little bit off. So I'm just going to drop that down a little bit. And I'm in selection mode as far as my action centers go. And it's always helpful. And then I'll just bring this up just a little bit. And these little tweaks sometimes really make a big difference. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this this polygon in the center right there, and I'm just going to move that out a little bit, and we'll use the W key, and that's just going to move that right along there. It's probably a little too low right there. There we go. And again, maybe I want to bring that in a little bit more, and I will scale that and grab that red handle right there, and maybe out a little bit more. Let's just see what that looks like. Okay, let me convert that back to a Catmull Clark. And yeah, that's much more of the form and shape that I want for that, the end of the strap. So let me do the same thing to this side. And let's just select these 3 end polygons and just do a little bit of smooth on them. And again, let's go select, convert that back to a poly model. All right. And these might be a little bit, I'm thinking these are probably a little bit too thin. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit just to thicken that up a little. And then I'll just select this that edge and bring that down just a hair to try to get a straight line going there. All right. And then again, let's go to this center poly. And then I'll hit the W key to move that out. And that's penetrating the sole. And I'll just bring that up a little bit. Okay, I think that's going to give me more of what I want. Shift tab, and yeah, much more of the shape that I want for those end pieces. Another thing I noticed with the strap part here is that the end pieces here in the real model are a bit thicker than what I've got here. And I think that thickness in the material is due to the fact that there is a stem underneath there that extends into the sole and attaches it to the sole itself. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just fatten that up a little bit. And there's a couple of ways I can do it. But I think the most efficient way would probably be to add another edge right in there. And let's go ahead and go to my edge mode, and I'll just go to add loop, and I'm just going to grab one right around there and just put that right there, and then hold down the shift key. Oops, add loop. Do it on this side as well. Okay, and then I'm just going to let's see, just grab this polygon and I'll just move it up. That's simple enough. Okay, and that thickens that. In fact, I'm just going to grab this little edge here, right there, and let's do an element push, see if that helps. No, just a simple move up is probably the better solution there. Yeah, that probably a little too much. Bring that down, and maybe just this guy here. Bring that guy down a little bit there as well. Yeah, just so that we have a little upward kick at the end there. Same with this one. Just grab this polygon right there. Use the move tool to just bring that up just a little bit. And then grab this edge and I will do the same. Just bring that up a little bit there. There we go. And again, it's probably a little bit more than I really need. So I'm just going to drop that down just a little bit. And yeah, so there we go. Now the other thing I need to do on the sole part of the sandal is to actually create a little indentation on here that accommodates the strap here, because the I guess the pressure of the stem and the machine that pushes it down does kind of create a little indentation on the top of the sandal. So what I'm going to do is just take that polygon. I'm just going to hit B for bevel, one of our favorite tools. You see that it does give me a much smaller polygon, and in this case I'm just going to move it down a little bit. Grab that blue arrow, move it down, so you can see I create a little bit of an indentation there. And yeah, so doing that, I want to make sure too that this is radial, perfectly radial. That looks good. Let's go back to this outer one here and make sure that that is radial as well. So that works. Okay, so both of those work. And the other thing, you'll notice that by pushing that down a little bit, and I no longer have contact with the strap on the surface of the sandal, and I need that to actually be kind of resting in that little well. Now while I'm on the layer with the strap on it, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm in one of the element modes there, and select element move, and just right click with my mouse to get a size I want, and just can see that that does now look as if it is resting in that little indentation. Great. And if I want, I can actually just go ahead and just take this edge and move it out just a little bit more so that it fills that indentation a little bit more. Okay, and I think that's good. Let's just do the same thing to the other side. So the last thing that I want to do to this sandal before we actually start texturing it is actually sharpen up these corners here, because you'll notice that in a real sandal they are stamped out of a large piece of foam with a very, very sharp die, and I want to make sure that we get that that sort of die cut look out of this sandal sole. So there's a couple of ways we can sharpen up these corners, and I'm going to show you both methods. So the first one is using standard, I'll do it with the bottom here, is just using the standard bevel tool, and what I'll do is I will first slide this edge far down as I can without merging vertices. I don't want it to actually merge vertices, so make sure that it's unchecked. And yeah, so that's pretty sharp, but not sharp enough. So with that selected, I'm going to just bevel this, and I'm just going to grab the blue handle, and that should give me another little edge. And I don't have to go very far, just the tiniest increment, like 600 600 microns, and that should do it. Give me a nice sharp edge, but that also added more geometry to my shoe. But the other way we could do this is through something called weight maps. So I'm going to select this edge, double click that, and it's not going to select entirely around the shoe, so I'll have to manually do that, and just get that edge loop right there along the top, and then go over to this edge crease tool. So I'm going to click on that, and it brings up a tool's properties, and I'm going to set that to about 20%. That's all I really need, and I'm just going to click in the viewport, and that sharpens that right up. Without adding any additional geometry, we added an edge weight there to actually create a very, very nice edge. All right, so moving on. The next thing we want to do is actually texture our shoe and make it look nice and pretty. And there's two things we need to do to establish textures. We need to have UV maps for the most part, and we need to actually have material assignments on the various parts of the shoe that we want to apply textures to. So with that, let's just start off with the sole, and I'm going to turn off the strap part of it. And I don't think I'm actually going to need UV maps for the sole with the way we want to actually texture this this part of the shoe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and select the various parts that I want there to be materials, and I'm just going to select the whole thing, double click on it. I'm going to hit the M key, and I'm just going to call this, we'll call this sole top. And I'm going to give it a color. I always like to kind of give them little pseudo colors, and nothing too fancy, something kind of pastel-ish. And there we go. Now let's select the sides. I'm going to loop select that. I'm going to loop select that one, and then go down here, select those two, and hit L. And there we go. Now I've got those all selected, and I'm going to give those a name. We'll call this sole sides. And I'm just going to give it a different color too. Just assign it a different color. Jump over to here. Okay, okay. There we go. And then, of course, the last part, which is the bottom. And let's see if we can select that a different way. We'll just select one polygon. And let's see. Let me go over to my select tools, and I'm going to select coplanar. And let's just click in the viewport. Yeah, that did a pretty good job, and I'm going to hit the Shift Up key to actually extend that selection to the very edge, and then we're going to call this sole bottom. There we go. And again, give this another little different color. That's just to kind of delineate the fact that I have different materials going on here. All right, let's look at the strap part of it now. Turn that on, turn the sole off. And this is a little bit different animal, so we've got to actually UV map this because we're going to be putting a pattern, at least on the top part of it. The bottom part is going to stay smooth, but the top, we're going to want a little decorative pattern on there. So it's going to have to kind of flow along with the strap's geometry there. But before we do anything with the UV maps, let's go ahead and just give this a texture name. So I'm just going to double click on any one of those polygons to select the whole strap. And I'm going to hit M and we'll call this strap. All right. And again, give it some sort of pretty color. Go over to this bright green. So now we want to go ahead and assign a UV map to this geometry. And the reason we do that, of course, is so that we can wrap an image around the contours of this strap. And the only way to do that is to actually create a version of this model, which is called a UV map, that sits flat and kind of like a pelt in two-dimensional space, like a bearskin rug or something like that. So you're unwrapping this geometry so that we can actually wrap a 2D image map and it will flow along the contours of this model nicely. So doing that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to jump over to my UV tools and I'm going to go ahead and open up this UV viewport here. So I can see what we're doing. And by default, MODO tries to create a UV map for all the geometry that you make. But most of the time it's pretty much garbage and you don't really find it very useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new UV texture. It's going to be new right here. We'll call this strap. All right. And you'll notice now we have a blank field, a blank canvas with which to put our UV map on. So, in doing so, I'm going to go ahead and select some edges around my model. And I'm going to double click that. Now think of this, the way I'm unwrapping this is I'm using the edges as if they were as if I had a pair of scissors and I'm just cutting along this edge here. So I'm going to separate these two halves of the model along those edges. So I have a nice closed loop on both of those. So I'm going to go to the, just scroll up here a little bit, and I've got the Unwrap and Relax tool. I'm going to click on that. And if you don't see the properties of that tool come up, just hit the K key and move it so that it's out of the way and just pin that somewhere up there. And I've got the method of unwrap set to conformal, and it's set to selected edges. So it's going to use those edges that I selected to separate the two halves. And then the iteration is 250. It could be, you just have to try certain numbers to see if they work. 250 will probably work. And I'm going to click in the viewport, and there we go. Now we've got our two halves. We've got the lower half here. You could tell it's the lower half because this is where the stem is, and the upper half. And we only really need the upper half. Okay. So I'm going to drop the tool. I'm going to go to polygons. I'm going to double click this one, and I'm going to get rid of it out of the UV map there. And delete UVs is down at the bottom. Click on that, and that clears that out. Now I want to flatten this out as much as possible. And the best way to do that, now we could use a relax, actually try and unwrap again and see if that does anything. It doesn't really do anything. In this, we could try a UV relax, click in the viewport and drag, and see if we get any results out of that. And it doesn't look like it's going to do much more than what it's doing here. I can try the iterations, see if that helps. And that's not really giving me much of anything. So let's try another tool called the rectangle tool. And I'm going to click there, and look what happens. It gives me a perfect rectangle here. And of course it's longer, or it extends beyond my UV coordinate space here, but that's okay. I'll fix that. And we could do that easily by using the Fit tool right here. Click there. And I want to keep proportions, but let's see if that works. Yes. All right. So now we can create a two-dimensional image that fits in this space here. And we can wrap that right along. It will flow beautifully along the top of this strap. And of course, we can adjust this by scaling it up and giving us a little more space with which to add an image to or whatnot. But we can do that later as we add images. So that's all we need to do for that. Now, I didn't want to completely ignore the bottom of the FlipFlop because, as you know, the strap actually has a little stem that penetrates through the sole and is fastened with a button through holes in the sole itself. So I wanted to, though we're not going to actually create a shaft and penetrate the sole of the sandal, I do want to give an indication that there is a button at the bottom of the sole. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and make some modifications to the bottom. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to the Control 1 key and bring up a pop-up menu and just turn off my work plane. That will allow me to see my grid here, or at least the wire mesh of the shoe a little bit better. So it's actually this polygon and this polygon that I'm most concerned with, as well as that one. So what I want to make sure I do is with those selected, I'll jump over to the Deform toolbox, click Radial, and click on that. And that should make those all square. Now, they don't look square here. Let's do a tab and double check, and yeah, they are square. Now, this little area right in here, this polygon, might be a little problematic. So I'm just going to use the Element Move tool, make sure that setting there on the, at least the range is set to 0. And then that would limit me to just that item. All right, and I probably want these to be a little bit bigger. So you notice they're different sizes right now. So I'm going to just scale each one of these up just to make them, because I know that once I convert this to a Camel Clark, those are going to shrink down quite a bit. So yeah, let's just resize those, get them roughly close to the same size. Same with this one, and resize that there. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to bevel them. And I'm going to bevel them once, and just bring them in just a little bit. And hold down the Shift key, click in the viewport to reactivate the bevel tool, and then pull that down like that. Now let's see what that looks like. I might even need to go with one more bevel, I don't know. Shift Tab, and there we are. Yeah, so we have these little indentations that we're going to use to have our buttons attached to, and probably the best thing to do is just go into a new layer, and I can actually do this in the bottom view there so I can see them. Go to my Create tab here, grab the cylinder tool, and I'm just going to do this off to the side for right now. Just do that, and I'm going to hold down the Control and grab one of these little boxes on the side there, and that is going to give me a perfectly actually symmetrical model there. And that's probably pretty big. I don't need it that big. So let's just go back to our bottom view. And I'm just going to hold down the Control, Shift there. The tool is still active, as you can see. And the other thing I'm going to do with the tool properties here is I'm going to make sure that the caps are quad grid on both sides. There we go. And I don't need this many edges on this. I can go with maybe 16. There we go. And segments, I'm going to go to 3 segments on that. And that's going to make a much tighter model for me. Perspective, and let's just push this up. Actually, I'm pretty much done with the modeling aspect of that. Oops. Move that in place. Use the, sometimes it's hard to see perspective, and I'm just going to bring that in like that. Okay, and hit, probably even make it a little bit smaller, but let's convert this to a Captain Clark first. That's pretty close. It's actually pretty close. And I might even want to take and bevel this edge. Just to get a little more sharpness to that. There we go. Okay, so I make one. And yeah. And I'm just going to move it down just even a little bit more, right about there. Okay, now I'm going to use a move tool to duplicate this. Move, and I'm going to hold down that control and the shift key at the same time, grab the red arrow and drag it over to the side there. And let me go to my bottom view here so I can line this up a little bit better. Bring it over there, and yeah, I probably need to drop that down right about there. Okay. Okay, with that highlighted, shift, control, and drag that blue arrow. And now I can just go ahead and move this into place here. That may be a little bit, my hole there might be a little bit big. Oops. Yeah, so let me just go ahead and go back to the sole. Shift up, so that everything scales, resize, and I'm just going to scale this in right about there. There we go. And I'll go to my perspective view. Okay, so that's all we need. Just name this something proper, and we are done with the modeling. Okay, now that we have our model pretty much all done, let's go ahead and add some textures to the shoe. We also paid attention to the UV maps that we needed for this strap, so I think we are ready to go ahead and apply textures. So the first thing I want to do though is clean up the scene a little bit. So I'm going to go to this curve layer. I really don't need that anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and select all three of these layers, and I'm going to merge them into one. And it's going to make it a lot easier to move this sandal around a little bit. So I'm just going to click OK, and let's just change the name to sandal. And there we go. All right, so with that, next thing I want to do is go ahead and open up our little render viewer here. And I'm going to click on that and then hit the A key to bring the sandal closer to the camera. Whenever I apply textures, I do like to have a lighting scheme set up. Now, a very basic lighting scheme doesn't have to be anything complicated. So we look here in our scene editor, we have a directional light, and I'm going to go to my options here, make sure under visibility, my light and my camera. Well, I can turn off the camera for now, just have the lights showing. Now, what that does is allows me to see where that light is placed in the scene. Now, right now it's a directional light, and I want to change that to let's see, an area light. And right away you can see that becomes a little square panel. And you'll notice also that the shadow is a lot softer and a lot more realistic. But I want to bring that light in a lot closer, so I'm going to move it in item mode with the W key. However, I want to make sure that my action center is set to selection. And the reason that is that it allows me to move this light in the direction that it is pointed. So I'm going to just move that in right about there. Yeah. And you'll notice that when you move the light closer, just like reality, the item brightens up. So I'm going to also rotate a little bit, probably move it above it a little bit more, get that shadow right underneath it. Okay, I think that's good. The other thing I want to do is I want to change the aspect ratio of the camera frame here. Right now it's much more of a horizontal aspect ratio and a lot of wasted space in this viewport frame here. So I'm going to go over to go over to shading. Go to render right there, and you'll see the frame on the first edge tab there, the properties, and the frame width and height is located right here. And I'm going to make that 1280, just make it square. And yeah, so that fills up that viewport a lot better and allows me to see my textures a lot better. Now the first texture I'm going to add is the top of the sole. So let me go ahead and click this little item here, which lets me click on a material. Now I can click either here in the viewport and it will highlight that material, or I can click here and it'll do the same thing. So I guess I can turn selection off there. All right, so let's go ahead and add a procedural texture. So I'm going to go to Add Layer, and I'm going to go to my, let's see, Enhanced Textures, Geometric, and I'll go to Dimples. Now, right away, you'll notice that the texture shows up in the render panel, but it doesn't show up in the OpenGL viewport. But that's normal because procedural textures need to be rendered to be able to show up. Now, right now, the procedural image is showing up as a diffuse color, and it's overwriting the diffuse color in the material node. So we want to change that to a bump map. And right now, if we look at that and we change that to a bump map, those dimples are going to be pretty large. So we need to adjust some settings in the procedural image parameters here. And the first thing is going to be the size. Right now it's set to about 27 millimeter. Also, we notice that it is being projected as a solid, which is fine. But let's go ahead and change the size. Now I'm going to scale this down. Now if I just click and drag on one of these little virtual sliders, you can see that it kind of gets elongated and squishes in just one direction. I don't want that. I want it equal in all directions. So I'm going to click there. Now as I drag, all of the texture in all directions scales. So I think that's probably pretty good right there. I'm happy with that. Now the other thing I want to do is go over to the texture layers, and I'm going to just play a little bit with the, I think it's the bias and gain. And let's see, the bias I think I want to set to 60%. Just bump that up a little bit. 60%. I'll leave the gain where it's at. And let's see, I think we are good right there. All I have to do now is just convert this to a bump. Now you'll see right now it's being applied as a diffuse color. So it's overwriting this color here in the materials panel. So if I click on the dimples and change that from diffuse color to a bump map, and bump maps are right under surface shading, bump, or you can type bump in this little area right up here, and I'll just go down there, and you can see immediately it creates a little bump map there. Now it's not showing up that great, and the other thing it's doing, it's really got a specular kick to it. Now these soles are this kind of sponge rubber, and they really don't have much in the way of reflectivity. So I'm going to go to the materials node here. I'm going to change the specular level down to 0. And I'm going to also bring the Fresnel down to 0. And there we go. Now we can see that bump. It shows up a lot better. Next thing I want to do is address the bottom of the sole here. But the problem is if I rotate down with the camera view, and I want to see any textures that's on the bottom of that sole, they're not going to show up very well, mainly because the light's lighting it from the top and not the bottom, and I'm not going to be adding any other lights to this. So the best thing to do is just turn my model around so it's facing the light. So I'll just use the texture. I can do this in item mode, so select the shoe and just rotate it. And there we go, just so it's facing the light a little bit, okay? Now also, I noticed the buttons are don't really have a texture assigned to them either. So what I'm going to do while I am looking at them, I'm just going to double click and hold the shift key and double click on each one of those to select those polygons. I'm going to hit the M for material, and I'm going to click the down arrow button, and we'll let's see, we'll assign these the same material as we do the strap. Okay, and then they have the same color, so it looks like it's actually the same item. Okay, so back to the sole area, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply an image map to the sole. And although we don't really have a UV map on here, the way we're going to project this image map will work just fine for us. So I'm going to go to up here to the image panel here, the images clip panel. I'm going to add a clip, and we'll just load images and navigate over to the images for this lesson and click the wavy image and click open. Open that guy. There we are. Now I'm just going to drag. I'm going to open up, let's see the sole bottom there. I'm just going to drag that image right into there. Now you'll notice that it's applied to a UV map that was created by MODO when we started building the sole. Now that's fine if we want to do that. However, what I would like to do in this case is just apply this as a straight planar projection, and the projection will be on the y-axis. And I'm going to go over to Texture Locator, Auto Size right here. Okay. And that applies it exactly how I want it on that on the sole. And again, we're going to change this to a bump map, and you'll notice bump has been that texture has been buffered in this recent area here. So I'm just going to apply that, and there it is. And that's all we need to do for that. Okay, so the last texture that I want to actually apply to the sole is right along the edge here. And you'll notice that on most foam products like this, where they've been, die cut and cut away, the exposed edge there has a kind of a grain to it, and almost like a soft sandpapery type of grain. And I wanted to see if I could just replicate that a little bit. So let's make sure that we are, correct vertical axis here. So I'm going to use the Y key, actually just go over here to the rotation of this object, saddle rotation right there, change that back to 0. So now let's go ahead and look at what we can do as far as the grain on that edge goes. So I'm going to select that right there so I can address the sole sides material here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a layer, and this is going to be under textures, and it's just going to be a simple noise texture right there. And again, this is a procedural texture, so it only shows up in the render. Okay, I'm going to just scale that up a little bit. I'm going to close out on this panel because I really don't need that open right now. Now you can see it is starting to apply some sort of just a random noise pattern. So let's go over to some of the settings and see what we can do to make that work for us. So I'm going to go to, first hit escape a couple of times to clear out the properties, whatever is in there, and then click on the noise, and that will be the only thing that's in that properties panel. And so let's look what we could do. The texture locator is fine. I don't think we have to change anything like that. But as far as the texture parameters go, we'll leave this at fractals. Set the frequencies to 8. Let's double the number of frequencies on there. And let's go ahead and change the frequency ratio to 1.84, I think. There we go. And now we change the amplitude up. Let's get the amplitude way up there. In fact, let's just put in a number 4.2. Oh, 2. Let's see what that does. There we go. Now you can see we've got a real sort of a grainy texture to that side. Okay. Now again, this is actually overriding the color, because whenever you first apply a texture, whether it's an image map or a procedural image, it puts it on the diffuse color channel. So it's overriding anything that's in the diffuse color channel in the materials. Okay. Now let's make sure that we change this to the bump that we want, and there we go. Now that's probably again a little much, and again let's go to the materials, turn down the specular, turn down the Fresnel, and there we go. So that's all we have to do for the side of the sole. Okay, we've come quite a ways with our little sandal here, and we want to finish it up by adding a decorative element to the top of the strap here. And oftentimes what you'll find with these little sandals is that they've added some sort of a molded pattern along the top part of the strap, and we want to do the same with ours. So let me jump over to Photoshop here and show you what I've done. I've created this little flourish pattern here, and it is a 1000 by 1000 square image. And the pattern is white against a clear backdrop, and that's kind of important because you don't want you only want the white part of the pattern to actually show up, and not the clear part. So of course you could do any pattern you want. I would recommend that you just keep it in a square aspect ratio. And I turned off the backdrop and saved it as a PSD. A PNG will also work. So let's jump back over to Modo, and I've already loaded this image into my Clips browser, as you can see. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag this into the strap material. But before I do that, I'm going to jump over to the UV map for the top of the strap. And you can see here, if I click all those polygons, you can see that it is only for the top part of that strap. However, if we look closely, we can see that the center polygons here, let me just select those center polygons, is narrower than the outer polygons here. You can see that in the UV map. However, in the real model here, we see that the center polygons are actually much wider than the edge polygons. So I want to correct that in order to keep the image at the correct aspect ratio when I map it onto the strap. So I'm going to, with my mouse over the UV editor and these center polygons selected, I'm going to hit the R key and bring up the scaling tool, and I'm just going to grab that blue handle at the top, and I'm just going to scale that up until I get it somewhere kind of close to the same proportions as what's on the strap itself. All right, I think that's good. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is go ahead and just add this flourish onto the strap material and see how it applies. And you can see it's pretty. It's a nice element the way it is there, but it's not really what I want. What I want is this this pattern actually tiled across the whole top of the strap. So how do we do that? Well, there's a number of ways we can do that. We can go to the texture locator right there on that edge tab, and make sure that horizontal and a vertical repeat is on. Now in this case we really don't need vertical repeat, so I'm just going to put that on to reset, so it only repeats along the horizontal part of the model. The other thing we could do is we can scale this down. Now we want to, of course, we want to make sure that we are on the right UV map, and the UV map texture is set to strap. A lot of times by default it will change to texture, and then you've got a different sort of mapping on there. And in this case we do have a specific UV map for this object. It's called strap. There it is. Okay, so here we go back to the locator. Now we want to set, even though we are not repeating it vertically, we are setting a vertical and horizontal wrap to equal numbers. So if I set both of those numbers, click the gang tool there and set those to 10, you see we get this sort of pattern. All right, and you can see that that image is repeating multiple times within that UV space. Okay, and I might want to go up maybe, let's do 12. I like that a little bit better. And the other thing we can do is we can just move, since we might want this center flourish to fall a little more to the right, we can actually do that by clicking in the UV viewport there and just moving the UV map a little bit to one side or the other. And I'll just grab that yellow arrow there. So if I were to go to extreme, you can see I can just cause that to ride all along there. And okay, I like that right there. And that's good enough. I'm going to drop the tool, drop the selection, and now I'm going to go to this flourish strap item here and make sure that its effect is set to bump, which is right there. You can type bump in the top here as well. And there we go. So let's convert this over to a render. And now you can see we have our little flourish. If you recall, our original backdrop item had an image that was mapped onto the surface of the sole. And I thought that would be kind of fun to do with our little sandal model as well. So what I'm going to do is just load in an image, and I found this lovely little surf scene on the internet, and you can get any image that you want to use for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump over to the shader tree, and I'm going to go over to the sole top, and I'm going to drag it and drop it right there. Now by default, it's probably going to want to map onto a texture, onto a UV map, which we really didn't create for this shoe. MODO created its own sort of UV map, but what we want to do is we want to change this to a standard planar projection. And you can see it's projecting on the one axis here, and the z-axis, and we want it to project down on the y-axis. Okay, now we see it's a bit big. It is projecting downwards, and so all I have to do is, let's see, jump over to the texture locator here. Oh, actually it's right here, and the auto size is right below all the transform parameters. Click on that, yeah, and it's auto size. Now right now it's kind of upside down, but we're going to fix that. Now I could just rotate it using these little Y rotation parameter here, but what I want to do is I want to show you how we can just in the viewport move this image around. So I'm going to go to my little viewport properties here, and under visibility I want to show texture locators. Okay, now you'll see there's a little box around that, and if you look here under the item, which is the surf scene image there, you'll see a little locator item right there. It's nested underneath each one of the textures. You'll see it has a texture locator. So if I click there or click the item, either one, you see I get a highlighted little box, and I can use the standard move tools, for example that, and with that located, with that locator highlighted, I can simply just move it around in real time. Now of course it repeats, and I could tell it to not repeat, reset, and it should so you'll see it kind of leaves a streak, but when we render it, it won't show up as anything. Actually, it'll just limit that image to the size of this square. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to, let's rotate this around. Holding down the control key, I can rotate it in 15-degree increments. There we go. The wave is near the bottom of the heel there. And I also want to scale it along this axis to just kind of get its proportions correct, right about there. And we can move it around and see where we want this to be, where it's going to look the nicest. I can actually just scale it up a little bit too, right there. So I have a little bit more playing room. I kind of like that right there. All right. Now when we render this, bring up the render engine, there we are. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is go over to my scenes. I'm just going to go up here to geometry. Let's see, a unit primitive in a new mesh, and it's just going to be a plane. All right. So I'm just going to click on that little button up at the top of the viewport there, which is going to make the inactive and active layers both solid and textured. Okay. And yeah, so now when I render, if I get my camera in kind of close there, let's go to the render window, and we have a nice little ground plane. And you can map that ground plane with any kind of image that you want. That'll make it kind of fun, but there we are. So there you have it, our fun little beach sandal exercise, and I encourage you to experiment with different patterns and different color schemes and just get familiar with the tools that we covered in this lesson. And thanks for watching.